Look at the map on the wall. The borders look like permanent scars on the face of the earth. We are taught that these lines are sacred, that they mark the ancient boundaries of peoples who have lived, spoken, and died on the same soil for thousands of years. We walk through grand national museums, looking at glass cases filled with ancient pottery, rusted swords, and weathered bones. The labels on the glass tell a simple story. These are your ancestors. They tell you that a prehistoric tribe, digging in the mud thousands of years ago, was the direct ancestor of the modern taxpayer. They draw an unbroken line from a Bronze Age settlement straight to the modern citizen. It is a comforting thought. It makes us feel like we belong to something larger than our brief, fragile lives. But the dirt does not care about flags. The people who buried those pots did not speak your language, did not share your religion, and had no concept of the nation-state you swear allegiance to today. This is a carefully constructed illusion. For most of human history, the concept of the nation-state did not exist. Yet, modern governments go to extraordinary lengths to convince you otherwise. They dig into the dirt, reconstruct ruins, and manufacture ancient myths out of thin air. How do governments use fake archaeology to claim ancient superiority? Why must they convince you that your identity is carved into prehistoric stone? The answer is not an accident of history. It is a calculated design. It is a story of political survival, industrial greed, and the systematic rewriting of the human past. The ground beneath your feet has been rewritten. To understand how this illusion took root, we must step back to a time before the nation-state existed. Imagine the world before the late 18th century. If you were to travel across the fields of Europe or Asia and ask a peasant about their identity, they would not give you the name of a modern country. A farmer working a rocky hillside did not wake up thinking they were part of a grand national destiny. They did not know what a nation was. They had never seen a map of their ruler's domain. Their world was small, bounded by the sound of the local church bells or the call to prayer. They identified with their village, their valley, their immediate religion, or the local ruler who demanded their grain. If they traveled just a few miles over the next ridge, they would encounter people speaking a dialect so different it sounded like a foreign tongue. There was no standardized language, no national curriculum, and no shared historical narrative. Rulers did not care about the cultural identity of their subjects. A king or a local warlord cared about two things: taxes and soldiers. They did not care what language the peasants spoke at their hearths, nor did they try to standardize their customs. In vast empires, populations were divided not by borders or languages, but by religious communities or local allegiances. A person's primary loyalty was to their faith or their immediate lord, not to a flag. The concept of a nation-state, a unified territory where the rulers and the ruled share the same culture, language, and historical identity, did not exist. But this fragmented world could not last. The rise of new political forces would soon demand a completely new way of organizing humanity. The turning point came in the late 18th century, catalyzed by the French Revolution of 1789. When the revolutionaries in Paris dragged their king to the guillotine, they did not just execute a monarch, they destroyed the traditional source of political authority. For centuries, kings ruled because they claimed God put them there. Once that divine authority was shattered, a terrifying question emerged. If the king does not rule, who does? The answer was the people. But this created an immediate, desperate crisis. Who exactly were the people? Where did they begin and where did they end? If the people of a region spoke a different tongue or looked to a different past, were they still part of the state? The search for historical boundaries became a matter of political survival. The state had to find a way to define its borders and its citizens, and it turned to history to find the answers. To solve the political problem of how to make millions of strangers willing to die for a line on a map, states had to weaponize the past. They had to turn history and the physical remains of the earth into a political weapon, selectively highlighting what fit their narrative and ignoring what did not. This is the core mystery: how governments systematically manipulate or fabricate historical records to justify modern political borders and claim ancient superiority. How do you get a fisherman on a distant coast and a miner in a mountain valley to believe they are brothers? They will never meet. They live completely different lives. Yet today, if one dies in a war, the other might weep for him. This is what theorist Benedict Anderson called an imagined community. It is imagined because the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members. Yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion. This psychological transformation was made possible by a shift in technology and economics, the rise of print capitalism. Before the printing press, the intellectual elites of Europe wrote in Latin. It was a universal language of the church, the courts, and the universities, keeping them isolated from the common folk who spoke regional dialects. But printers are businessmen. They wanted to sell books to the largest possible audience. Latin was a dying market, limited to a tiny class of educated elites. So, printers began publishing books and pamphlets in the local vernacular languages spoken in the major cities. They targeted the rising middle classes who could read, but did not know Latin. This economic drive changed everything. As these vernacular languages were printed, they became standardized. Out of dozens of regional dialects, a single dominant written language emerged in each region. The printing press acted as a giant filter, smoothing out the linguistic diversity of the countryside and creating a unified medium of communication. Then came the rise of the daily newspaper and the novel. In the 18th and 19th centuries, thousands of people would read the same morning news. Anderson describes this as a mass, silent ritual. When you read the newspaper, you are aware that thousands of other people, whom you will never meet, are reading the exact same words at the exact same time. You are all consuming the same narrative, reacting to the same events, and using the same language. This shared experience creates the psychological foundation of the imagined community. You begin to imagine yourself as part of a vast, synchronized group of people moving through history together. The nation was born in the ink of the printing press. But print was not enough. To build a nation, you need to standardize the mind of every citizen. In the 19th century, European states actively engineered national identities. They looked at their populations and saw a chaotic mess of regional cultures and languages. The state went to war against its own people's diversity. The primary weapon in this war was compulsory public education. For the first time in history, the state took children away from their families and placed them in classrooms run by government-trained teachers. The goal was not just literacy, it was indoctrination. Children were taught a single, standardized version of the national language, and they were taught to see the state as their true parent. The rich variety of regional cultures was systematically flattened into a single, state-approved identity. This was not a peaceful process. It was a systematic erasure. In schools across these territories, the state implemented strict rules. Children who spoke their native regional dialects were punished and publicly humiliated. The state wanted to make the children ashamed of their parents' language. Through these methods of systematic pressure, regional languages were erased in a few generations. The peasant was forcibly transformed into a citizen, his brain rewired to serve the capital. The state created national symbols, designed flags, and wrote anthems, presenting them as sacred legacies of a mythical past to foster national loyalty. Why did this standardization happen in the 19th century and not before? The philosopher Ernest Gellner provided the answer. It was not just about national pride. It was an economic necessity driven by industrialization. Gellner argued that agrarian societies are characterized by cultural diversity. In a feudal system, the ruling class has a completely different culture and language than the peasants who work the land. This diversity does not threaten the system because the social structure is rigid and static. A peasant does not need to communicate with a peasant in another province. They only need to plow their field. But industrialization changes everything. An industrial economy requires division of labor, occupational mobility, and constant communication. A worker must be able to move from a farm to a factory, read safety signs, understand blueprints, and take orders from a supervisor. A clerk must be able to write standardized reports that can be read by a manager in another city. The old, localized ways of learning, where a child learned a trade from their father or a priest in a village church, could not meet this demand. The economy required a highly mobile, literate, and linguistically unified workforce. The only institution capable of providing this level of cultural standardization was the modern state through its centralized education system. The state took control of education away from local communities and religious institutions, establishing a monopoly on knowledge. They systematically constructed a unified national culture that had never previously existed. They did this not out of a love for heritage, but to keep the gears of the industrial machine turning. The nation-state, in Gellner's view, is the direct product of industrial capitalism's need for cultural uniformity. This shift meant that the state had to define what the national culture would be. They had to choose one dialect, one history, and one set of values, and elevate them above all others. The chosen culture was presented as the ancient, authentic culture of the entire people, while all other regional cultures were dismissed as backward. The state created a standardized citizen to fit the standardized factory, and in doing so, they erased the actual, diverse history of the people who lived within their borders. To make this new, artificial culture feel natural, states had to make it look old. This is what historian Eric Hobsbawm identified as the invention of tradition. When you watch a state ceremony, with its ancient-looking costumes, solemn rituals, and historic symbols, you assume you are witnessing a tradition stretching back to the dawn of time. But look closer at the history of these rituals. Most of them were created out of thin air by modern states to legitimize their political power and foster national loyalty. They took modern inventions and wrapped them in the shroud of antiquity to create a unified identity. Governments did this on a massive scale. They designed national flags, wrote national anthems, and created public holidays, presenting them as sacred legacies of a mythical past. These manufactured traditions gave the population a sense of eternal belonging, hiding the reality that the state they served was younger than their grandfathers. The battle for national legitimacy moved from the classroom to the dirt. Written histories were no longer enough. Historians could argue over texts, and treaties could be disputed. But physical evidence, a stone fortress buried in the earth, a collection of ancient weapons, the bones of prehistoric settlers, these felt indisputable. This need for physical proof transformed the study of the past from a hobby of wealthy collectors into a highly funded, state-controlled tool. Governments realized that whoever controlled the dirt controlled the narrative of the nation. They directed vast resources toward excavations. But this funding was not neutral. It came with strict expectations. Researchers were sent out to find physical remains that proved their nation had a historical, exclusive right to a specific piece of land. If a team dug up a site and found evidence of a different culture that predated their own, the findings were often downplayed, ignored, or buried. The goal was to draw a direct line of ownership from the modern state to the ancient soil, using physical remains to justify the conquest and retention of territory. They systematically demolished layers of history that did not fit the narrative to present a pure, ancient monument. They erased centuries of actual complex history to fit a nationalist narrative. The physical ruins were reconstructed to match the desired national myth, while the inconvenient layers of history were discarded as rubble. This manipulation of the physical record created a dangerous precedent. It turned the study of the past into a zero-sum game, where the presence of an artifact could be used to justify the expulsion of a population or the annexation of a territory. The danger of using physical data to prove a pre-existing, exclusive right to a specific piece of land is that it treats history as static, ignoring the reality that human populations have always been in a state of flux. It creates a weaponized prehistory that can be used to justify modern conflicts. This process of rapid national invention was not confined to Europe. Across the globe, nations were forced to invent themselves to survive. Consider Japan. Prior to the 1850s, Japan was highly fragmented, with populations loyal to local daimyo warlords rather than a unified country. The common people did not identify as citizens of a unified nation. They identified as subjects of their local lord. Their loyalty was to the soil they farmed, not to a central government. There was no sense of a single nation. But the arrival of U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry's gunships in 1853 forced the rapid consolidation of a centralized Japanese state and a newly manufactured national identity to resist colonization. The shockwaves of this event forced the ruling class to realize that to resist foreign empires, they had to build a modern, industrial state. And to do that, they had to create a unified nation immediately. The new regime set to work manufacturing a national identity. They took the figure of the emperor and elevated him to the absolute ruler of a unified race. They promoted historical myths to make the people feel like one giant family. They implemented compulsory education, forcing children to bow to the imperial symbols and recite state oaths. They dismantled the local domains and replaced them with centralized administrative districts. They created a conscript army, forcing young men from different regions to train together and speak a standardized version of the language. Within a short period, a fragmented collection of local domains was welded into a highly nationalistic state, ready to compete on the global stage. The threat of foreign colonization had forced the rapid construction of a national identity that had never previously existed. When national pride drives the search for physical evidence, the pressure to produce results can lead to outright fabrication. Governments and institutions pressure researchers to produce discoveries that bolster national prestige. The desire to claim the birthplace of humanity or the oldest civilization for a specific state can blind the scientific community. They ignore inconsistencies, restrict access to the original finds, and build a whole national narrative around discoveries that are later revealed to be complete fabrications. The pressure to produce national glory through physical remains has led to major scandals, where artifacts were planted in the dirt to make a nation's history look older and more advanced than it actually was. Sites were declared National Historic Landmarks based on planted tools and fabricated layers of soil. The public and the state accepted these discoveries without proper scrutiny because the finds fed their national pride. They did not want to question what made the nation look great. The manipulation of physical remains reaches its darkest, most destructive peak when it is used to justify invasion, annexation, and systematic ethnic cleansing. States claim they are not conquering new territory, but merely reclaiming their ancient homeland, using fabricated physical remains to provide the justification for violence. It shows the extreme danger when the study of the past is weaponized as a tool of state expansion. How then do governments use fake archaeology to claim ancient superiority? The mechanism is systematic, and it operates on multiple levels. First, they control the funding. They direct resources toward projects that support the national narrative while starving those that might complicate or contradict it. If researchers want to get a grant, they know they must frame their work in a way that aligns with the state's goals. This creates a self-censoring community that produces the results the state desires. Second, they practice selective preservation and reconstruction. They rebuild and highlight the ruins of the culture they claim as their ancestors, while letting the remains of other, inconvenient cultures crumble or disappear. They build museums that present a clean, linear story of the nation, ignoring the messy realities of migration, conquest, and cultural exchange. They present these manufactured histories as objective truth, using the authority of the museum and the textbook to silence dissent. Third, they use physical ruins to draw direct, unbroken lines from modern political regimes to ancient, legendary civilizations. They alter ruins to fit the desired national narrative, erasing the layers of history that do not fit. By the time a child reaches adulthood, they have been taught to see the physical ruins around them, not as the remnants of a complex, shared human history, but as proof of their nation's eternal greatness. The dirt is made to speak, but it only speaks the language of the state. They use the past to justify the present, convincing millions of strangers that they share a sacred, eternal bond that justifies the borders they live within. This manipulation of history is not limited to the past. It continues today. Governments around the world still use physical remains to justify their territorial claims and promote national pride. They use the physical soil to create an illusion of ancient ownership, ignoring the reality that human history is a story of constant movement and change. They want us to believe that our identities are carved into stone, but those stones were often placed there by the state itself. If the nations we belong to are not ancient, eternal entities but modern constructions, what does that mean for how we live today? It means the absolute divisions we draw between ourselves and others are not written in the stars, nor are they buried in the soil. They are lines drawn by politicians, reinforced by standardized languages, and validated by manufactured histories. We have been trained to see our national identity as a sacred, immutable truth. But history shows us it is a product of political necessity and economic change. When we look at history with clear eyes, we do not see pure, isolated peoples living within static borders. We see a story of migration, mixing, and adaptation. No nation is pure, and no culture is static. The belief in our national superiority is a comforting illusion, but it is an illusion that has been used to justify unspeakable violence. When we weaponize the past to claim an exclusive right to a piece of land, we ignore the shared reality of our common humanity. As modern citizens, we have a responsibility. We must critically examine the myths, the traditions, and the histories handed down to us. We must ask who benefits from these stories and what they are trying to make us forget. We are not defined by a fabricated past, nor are we bound by the borders of the mind that states have constructed for us. We are defined by the choices we make today, by how we treat the strangers who live across the lines on our maps. Let us build our identity not on the illusion of ancient superiority, but on the shared reality of our common human journey. We are the descendants of migrants, travelers, and survivors who crossed borders long before those borders had names. Let us honor that legacy by building a world based on cooperation rather than division. If this exploration made you question the history you were taught, share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. Until next time, keep questioning the stories they tell you.